Okay, well, thank you very much for the passing over of the baton to us and my group of esteemed colleagues who are going to be talking about augmented intelligence in practice. It's a pleasure to be here, and we hope to provide you with some practical information on the advances in AI, but also some interesting discussion subjects regarding data management, but also possibilities within AI development, not just for replacing us, but also for helping dermatologists, hopefully. So with this, I'd like to introduce our co-hosts of this session. We have Veronica Rodenberg from New York in the US with us. We have Dan Mularkey and Dilraj Kelsey from the UK, Birmingham. We have Sam Polisi from my own department in Gothenburg, Sweden. We have Giuseppe Malvei from Barcelona, Hospital Clinic, and we have Philip Channel from Vienna, of course. And so let's begin. Oh, by the way, my name is John Pauli. I'm from Gothenburg, Sweden as well. So great to be here. And I wanted to start with you, Veronica, if that's okay. Veronica, you presented your results on and work with the ISAC archive, and you're actually chairing the AI working group there. And so far, you've collected over 50,000 cases now, and 9,000 of these are melanomas, which is impressive. And I think it's probably one of the largest open access archives, which is fantastic, and a great resource for a lot of people working with AI in dermatology. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit, I'm curious about how long it's taken you guys to collect all these images and how the collection process is working nowadays. Is the growth becoming exponential, or is it still linear? Hard work, I can imagine. So let us know a little bit more about this, please.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to answer the question, but I do want to say, the International Skin Imaging Collaboration, ISIC, is a global collaboration of interested folks from around the world, from industry and academia. And, I didn't even do like a small fraction of all the things that ISIC has done. It started in 2016, so it's taken about 7 years to get to where it is right now. Definitely, I would say the number of images is increasing, but not quite at an exponential rate. I think, Phil and Joseph have contributed thousands of images to the archive. And I think big boluses like that from institutions that take a lot of images are a big part of why the archive has managed to continue to grow so quickly. But they require a ton of work. I think contributors spend hours, years cleaning the data, combing through their EMR, making sure the labels are appropriate. And then on the back end, ISIC performs an additional quality review to make sure that there's no protected health information and erroneous diagnoses, although Phil has managed to upload an Easter egg. So our quality assurance processes it was not a protected health information Easter egg, fortunately. So, I think one of our big goals for the coming years is to scale the process. Not everyone works at an institution that has 50,000 images. And I think it's of huge value to the AI, but also the educational community, people who are dermatologists, GPs in training who want to look at example images and learn how to diagnose skin disease, to collect images from all over and from places that aren't doing the type of volume of imaging that we might be doing at MSK in New York or at some of the institutions that have contributed images. So that's a huge effort for the coming years. I hope that it will lead to exponential growth, but I know that it might slow down the growth a little bit to collate images from smaller centers. And we even have collaborators in, private dermatology practices who are interested in submitting images. I think that's going to end up being the future because we really need to improve our representation of skin of color and of rare diseases. And if we focus on specialty centers, we'll never be able to get the amount of images of underrepresented things and people that we need. So that's going to be a huge effort in the coming years. And as I already mentioned to the panelists, like, please be in touch with me if you're interested in learning more about how to contribute images to ISIC.
Excellent, Veronica. Well, excellent work so far, and I wish you guys the best of luck in the future collecting more images, especially. And that was actually my follow-up question regarding darker skin types where you're lacking images. Of course, a population that doesn't have as many skin cancers, the incidence is lower in these populations. But you mentioned also in your talk about the 2020 ISIC Grand Challenge. And it was interesting to see how the accuracy dropped quite drastically for cases from Brisbane. And I'm guessing that it would be the same for the rest of Australia as well. And the population there, you didn't really have time to get into the details, but now perhaps we can discuss, is it because of their lighter skin type, the chronic sun damage, the lentigo maligna type melanomas? Is this really the basic issue?
It's really all of the above. We actually did have images from Sydney, and those tended to be a little bit easier for the AI, at least the top models, than the Brisbane teams. I think, it all comes down to the statistical distributions in the data set. And that is one of the things that I think we all really need to emphasize as we start thinking about putting these algorithms into practice. The training data set in Brisbane didn't have as many melanomas as some of the other data sets. So, algorithms are going to think that most of the images from Brisbane are not melanoma. I think also, having reviewed the images myself, they're very challenging, but we just really need to spend more time thinking about these distributions when we're interpreting algorithm outputs. I don't think it necessarily had to do with the skin type, although the severe photo damage, I think, is challenging for dermatologists and for models, as much as the underlying distributions that we know.
Maybe I can add something here.
Yes, please do. Please do.
So what when I hear about these things, I imagine, do we wish for something by the computer that we ourselves cannot do? If you place me into Brisbane tomorrow, I'm lost. I'm lost. I can do skin cancer screening on Austrian patients or European patients, but I'm lost in Australia or in Florida for that case. Where with the chronic sun damage, we cannot do it and we have to adapt. And maybe we need to find ways that machines are also allowed to adapt rather than have one machine that can do everything from the spot. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and if I can say
Please.
something as well, just to complement my friends in this conversation, is that, yeah, we need to figure out what representation of lesions we need to still, or what we are still missing. Of course, in Brisbane, probably it's a research center, and the population they collect is very special in Australia, even in Australia. So it's difficult. The definition of these populations or subpopulations that we have in the archives, it's something that we need to understand. And we need to understand also how to label these images with information that in the end will be important to understand what's the population that it's represented in the archives. So it's complex. It's a real effort, and it's not the same academic centers than private centers or the community of the IDS people sending in the chat or in different webinars or in their social media, the cases they visit every day. So it's different. And we know that we need to, of course, a representation of tumors that are in special anatomic sites. I'm thinking in nails or in scalp or in many other places that are particular, and we don't have many of them. And also hypopigmented lesions. So it's many things that we need to understand. But this is a community effort, and probably the next generation of the ISIC archives have to consider what do we need for the future to improve what we already have. And in Barcelona, we were sending images that probably are not representing the population of atypical mole syndrome that people have in other places. The same.
I would like to add on that. I think it also needs to be feasible, the amount of metadata that we require from researchers when we add image sets to these, such as the ISIC archive. It also has to be a very easy way for us to add data, so that it shouldn't be a hurdle. That's also important.
Yeah, and it cannot be a long list of data.
No, exactly.
Although,
it needs to be feasible.
But it's always what I mentioned. If my melanomas are detected in an academic center, understanding the genetic background of the patient, it's digital dermoscopy follow-up, then we apply confocal and we are super experts. Well, probably you have to know this, because this is not the usual melanoma case you will see in many other places, and most of these cases cannot be, this is my opinion, detected just by dermoscopic pictures, because I don't have any clue.
Fantastic. So speaking of data collection, we do have a few questions from the audience, and just a reminder to everyone listening in that you're very welcome to ask your questions in the chat. So we have a colleague from Brazil, Fabiane Bregonce, who's asking, how do you see that metaverse? I think that's, is that the new Facebook? Metaverse could be used in dermatology practice other than lectures and classes. Is this something that you see that can be used in the future? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is the metaverse, or is that just Meta? Facebook? Am I mixing things up?
I think you got it mostly right.
Mostly right.
I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the question, but to the extent that I understand it, I think there are two sort of major aspects to answer that question. First of all, groups all over the world, including like very prominently, I think at Melanoma Institute Australia and a few other places, have come up with, risk prediction algorithms based on like what color is your hair and, what is your family history? How many primary melanomas have you had? And those can be generated for particular clinical settings, and I think are very useful in trying to predict, especially like individuals' risk for melanoma. To the extent that ISIC or images with images and metadata can be used, I'm wondering if, Phil, some of your work on content-based retrieval is useful to clinicians when they're trying to think about what to do in a clinical setting. Or not.
Phil, do you want to comment?
So for the content-based image retrieval, I think this is an open question. I think we have not found out yet. I am very positive, but I'm biased. But I'm happy to be wrong, of course. That's how science works. I think also the question about, I think what you meant about the metaverse is maybe about virtual reality, right? Because one of the talks was showing the new 3D photography where you have avatars of a whole patient. I would say, I think this is an interesting approach to have now three-dimensional patient photographs that maybe are better in teledermatology than just 2D images. Just as a word, as an academic, of course, I would not pin it down to one company. But I would say if there's an open standard on doing virtual clinics with 3D and imaging and whatsoever, I think it's a nice idea. I just think it's a bit of a future work.
Yeah, and John, if I can pick up,
yes,
I think the use cases that I'd see potentially for this are that virtual clinic, trying to keep, if possible and if appropriate, and the patients are happy to, keeping patients out of acute care settings. Certainly in the UK, a lot of dermatology care is performed within the hospital setting. If you're able to capture the important parts of that information outside of that hospital setting, and then facilitate interactions between clinicians and patients, using something like the images that have come out, or the visuals that have come out of the metaverse, and that could be one use case. And then the other one, I think we've seen examples in other aspects of medicine, in sort of virtual surgery, where you're having that peer-to-peer, clinician-to-clinician expertise being shared remotely with the use of goggles and things, so that the picture that's being seen by one side to the other, whether that's as applicable in a dermatology use case, perhaps less so than some of the other more general surgery aspects. But I think there is a value in that virtual reality element potentially.
Excellent. So I actually want to get to Dan and Dilraj's lecture after this, but we have one more question from the audience as well. It's from Robert De La Valle. I hope I'm pronouncing, or De La Valle, perhaps, from Denver, it seems. And he's asking about any chance professional derm or organizations creating registries or databases like AAD's DataDerm can contribute images for AI development. I'm not too familiar, but perhaps Veronica, are you familiar with the DataDerm at AAD, or Giuseppe, Phil?
I am, but I don't have any direct knowledge of a imaging data set that is being developed for AI purposes specifically. That doesn't mean that it's not happening, but to my knowledge, I don't have a direct knowledge of one.
Okay. So let's jump. Please, Giuseppe. Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify that the value of the images is not by itself collecting pictures.
Yeah.
It's that you have to label, you have to understand what are you putting in the database, and this is a lot of effort, and has to be some rules, and this is very essential. So of course we will see how to make it easier for the participating people in these efforts. But in the end, labeling diagnostics is not an easy thing, just to mention one. Okay, this is a melanoma. Okay, who said that? Sometimes, and this is relevant, and this is something that is the message. So we are labeling, we are building archives, but they have to follow some quality assurance and rules, otherwise it's nonsense to collect. And how many lesions we do need for a particular issue? So I don't need more reticular in situ melanoma probably in my population to provide for the archives. It's there, okay? But so we don't need millions of the same image. So, and we need to help the people because in the end, what we need is the representation of different conditions that are not there at the time we are living. Just
wonderful. So yeah, we definitely need good data for sure. Dan and Dilraj, you for those listening who haven't perhaps had time to watch their lecture, that you guys have introduced, if I understood correctly, an AI-powered teledermatology service in the UK, based in Birmingham, correct? And this was implemented. I don't know if the timing was just perfect, or if the pandemic really shot things into action. But it was during the pandemic that it really kind of got going, I understood. And you proved a high sensitivity, especially when you had the new version of your application. And you also were able to reduce the number of unnecessary visits by about 23% in a safe manner without missing diagnosis, which is of course important. What I was wondering was what kind of feedback, if any, did you get from the users, both GPs and dermatologists on either side of the application? Did they have an educational value for the GPs, getting feedback back from the machine, or also from after the patient was actually seen and diagnosed? Were there trust issues from the dermatologist? Please feel free to comment.
Yeah, of course. So I guess there are a couple of things that you mentioned. Was the timing sort of fortuitous? Was the impact of that? I think it would absolutely be lying if we said that there wasn't an impact and the pandemic hadn't expedited conversations that were probably happening in the background going along. As we said in the presentation, University Hospitals Birmingham are a big secondary care hospital in the middle of the UK, in the Midlands there, and they're very proudly going about trying to adopt new technologies wherever possible to help address problems that they're having. So I think the starting point is acknowledging that they have problems with, like so many other aspects, volume of patients that are needing to be seen on these 2-week wait clinics, and a scarcity of dermatologist capacity to do it. So they went from a pure face-to-face before to needing to have patients seen in hubs. They didn't have any concept of teledermatology up and running at that time. And so the opportunity was taken to look at how can you introduce a class 1 medical device to that pathway, so that patients that are deemed to be low risk, it can be seen by a capacity that is not the trust's own dermatology resource. It's using a different pool of dermatologists to help support and take those cases away from the trust. And in terms of feedback, and Dilraj may come back through, I think it's been definitely interesting to see how they've adapted to seeing the outcomes. I think it's an interesting one where as you first launch, it will be very anecdotal, and patients will report on their own experience and what they see for that case, and where they agree with the suggested classification from the medical device, and where they disagree. And then as you start to do the volumes that the pathway is now seeing, and you're able to do it on a larger level, they start to really understand that you need to move away from that sort of anecdotal part of it got it right here, it got it wrong there, to what is the overall impact on the pathway and the service there.
Interesting. Dilraj, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting kind of interplay of we've got potentially for any given lesion, we've potentially got 3 quote unquote opinions. You've got the classification from the AI, you have potentially a 1 teledermatology review of a low risk lesion, but then if that's decided that should be referred in, it's then an opinion from the trust dermatologist too. And the interplay of those 3 things, when you kind of have potentially a trust dermatologist looking at another teledermatologist opinion as well as an AI classification, that's one of the things where it sort of what would they have done independent of those 2 things? And I think sometimes that point of kind of working with a pathway that has those components of information has introduced some complexity, and it's not just kind of a one-to-one. Each individual is just looking at one lesion independent of everything else going on in that pathway. So that does introduce some interesting kind of feedback loops, and perhaps where, you know, one clinician might have discharged a given lesion and they've seen someone else has referred that, they may second guess what they would have otherwise done. But this is something that we're all working on as a group and in a collaborative way. Like we said, like we've alluded to in data sets, you know, we need to see what the opinions are of multiple dermatologists for a really high quality data set anyway. So it's an interesting one. It's one that we continue to learn from as much as we can.
Maybe can I just comment something? Because I find this project very interesting, because I think it shows us where these things might happen in the future, because you're not solving skin cancer detection globally, but you had this specific organizational bottleneck of the 2 weeks wait system, which I for many of the watchers, this is something where you can have a faster access to dermatologists, and this is just, the queue is just going up. So just cutting down the queue was the task, as far as I understood. And for this case, I think it worked well, because you're not replacing anyone, but you're helping cutting down the queue. And I think this is something quite nice as an idea in general for these types of applications.
Yeah, and I had several questions for you guys, because and maybe this is a time for you, because my experience with Telederm is that you have a number of people, very diverse, even if you have contact with a community of GPs that you connect with with the Telederm services in Barcelona. And how did you teach these people how to use this information? Because from the perspective of those that we know where you can apply an algorithm and where it's not working, because basically we know the biases or we know the limitations. How did you work with your GPs, training them to understand when and where you can use these tools in the usual clinical scenarios? And the perception by people, the end users and patients, is very interesting in different cultural backgrounds. You know, we have some papers in Germany where the patients were asked, what do you think if the algorithm is super good in detecting melanoma, even better than dermatologists? Could you trust only the algorithm or the algorithm and the dermatologist? And most people were saying, that was surprising. What I want is to use independently the information of the algorithm and doctors, not in collaboration. And if there is any contradiction between the two of them, then I follow excision. No. So how the people understand these things is something complex, and probably in Barcelona it's different. I don't know. So it's something that we need to understand, and probably you have now the position to understand and to solve these questions. I don't know. How do you follow your GP? Some people are good, others not.
Yeah.
Some are more prone to this cultural shift with these new technologies, others not.
Okay, before Dan and Dilraj answer the question, just for time, because we're really running short. So 30 seconds, quick response to a very complex question, please.
So picking up the first one, training, actually the pathway starts after the referral has been made. So these are patients who've already, their GP has determined that they're concerned enough to send them in. And so you're able to, in this model, train a smaller number of skilled users to do the data collection and data capture at the hubs. So you're able to overcome some of those. Picking up on a second part, which is, I think, important and goes back to an earlier conversation about, we absolutely have exclusions. We are absolutely acknowledging that there are some lesions, acral surfaces, nails, mucosal surfaces that are not appropriate to have artificial, for derma algorithm to be used on them. But they may still be appropriate for a teledermatology review, and a consultant dermatologist may still be able to address that. So smaller, doing it in the hubs, having fewer users that you need to train, and then handling exclusions and making sure those patients' care isn't reduced. I can't read my writing on what the second part of the question was. I don't know.
I think it was to do with how we help clinicians use all the information to hand. So everything that you would expect of a teledermatology review, they have all the history, they have all the images to hand, and the AI output is one of the components of the information. So it's always that complete holistic picture that they're using. We're not trying to kind of just have it as filtered information in any way. Every clinician that's on the pathway is looking at all of the information.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, guys. We have to move on to, I want to fit Sam Palisi into our discussion session as well. Phil, you've had some time to talk. You have some excellent stuff. I just have to recommend everyone your lecture, and Giuseppe as well. We might not have time to ask you particular questions, but you did have time to discuss some points. But Sam, of course, in your lecture and mine together, we discussed our work on trying to find AI models that can distinguish between melanoma in situ, thin invasive melanomas, thick invasive melanomas, over or under 1 millimeter in thickness. And of course, this can, it's a very specific question asked at a specific time point. So it's a very specific use of AI in dermatology. But what do you see is the future of this type of thinking, and what are the benefits for patients?
Well, I certainly believe this is a type of augmented intelligence that would integrate nicely into the dermatologist assessment. A friendly face saying what they think, like the algorithm adding to your decision. And I think this is a very frequent binary classification problem, and it's a very good use case that we could use to conduct prospective clinical trials. And of course, the problem will be, how well does the algorithmic output integrate into clinical practice? And what about discrepancy? At the end of the day, it's a cognitive problem, really. It's a psychological issue, whether to trust or not to trust the algorithm. But it will be very interesting to target this in future prospective clinical trials. And in fact, we are planning to conduct them to start at the end of next year, really. So probably you'll hear more about this. And of course, this fits into a broader research agenda. Maybe, John, you want to conclude with that as well.
Yeah, well, I actually want to just mention a few questions from the audience as well, if we have time. Thank you so much, Sam, for these comments. We had a question, and we'll do it a little bit short here, from Philip Effel, who's also from Graz, so perhaps a colleague of yours, Phil. What is crucial for aspiring dermatologists when it comes to AI? Phil, can you answer this in 15 seconds?
Don't care too much about algorithms, care about data. I think the next sexiest job is data engineer and not AI engineer.
Perfect answer. I love it. Amanda Oakley, lovely to have you. Funding is needed for large image sets. Who pays to label and prepare the images needed for AI projects? Current commercial fees per image are insufficient to cover costs, and Isaac is a free resource without any funding at all. Your thoughts in 15 seconds, Veronica. What do you say?
It's a huge problem. I think many funding agencies like the NIH and others have started slowly and probably too late to acknowledge that this is a needed area for actual dollars, because it's a huge aspect of AI development. I would say one of the things that ISIC is trying to do is support academic endeavors, issuing, I said this earlier, like digital object identifiers for data sets that are contributed so that people can publish them or get academic credit from their institution for having participated in the project. But I think it's an ongoing issue. We'd be delighted to support, grant applications, things like that, and are working on some ourselves. But I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Wonderful. Well, I wish I had another half hour or even an hour with you guys, but thank you all for your comments and time and great discussions. A lot of interesting stuff. So we'll have to have a new Congress soon. Thank you all in the audience for listening and coming. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of our next session, Christoph Su from Switzerland. Nice to see you, my friend.
Nice to see you as well.
The Passion Project. Welcome.